very special guest here today. Daniel Spreadbury, who is the Dorico Product Marketing Manager, is here today to talk about Dorico 3, the latest update to Steinberg's music notation software program. Daniel, it's really great to have you back.
Thanks for having me back, Nikhil.
Now, condensing is one of the big revolutionary features in Dorico 3, the ability to condense multiple players on a single staff in a logical, clear, and intelligent fashion. Clearly, this didn't happen overnight, so could you give me some scope as to the work that went into this new feature?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's safe to say that we've been thinking about condensing since really the day we started thinking about Dorico. So we started at Steinberg 7 years ago, very nearly now. And yeah, it was something that we wanted to do right from the beginning. I think that the way we think about it is that obviously the goal of any music notation software, and especially what we've tried to do with Dorico, is to kind of save you time basically, and to make it quicker than doing stuff by hand. And so looking at the things that we had done in the past, like coming up with a way of, I mean, obviously first, if you go all the way back to like the very beginning of notation software, about having part extraction, so you'd have to write the parts out again. Then the second advance is then having the parts being from the same file as the score, so that an edit in one updates the other. Then, of course, there's collision avoidance, which we introduced back in, Sibelius 4, back in the old place. And so we're then looking at what's the next thing that really is going to provide that big leap in terms of productivity and in terms of score and part preparation. And that was, right in our minds from the very beginning when we started thinking about Dorico, is, to be able to make it so that you could still have all of the other benefits, like parts that you can extract, parts that are updated when you edit the score, everything being beautifully formatted, but also that you could then have a conductor's score where all of the music is sort of shown as efficiently as possible on as few staves as is reasonable to show, was to kind of come up with a way of doing that right from the beginning of when we conceptualized Dorico. And it's taken a long time to get to the point where we actually have the feature, of course. I don't think it's kind of giving away any secrets to say that we originally planned it to be part of the very first version, but as the development kind of proceeded, and we did a good year's worth of work also on it before version 1 came out, but it became apparent that we weren't going to fit that in, and and add lyrics or other things that people were going to want to have in that first version. So we had to park it.
Can I jump in, Daniel, and ask you? Do you guys have a grand plan? Are there more things that are unmentioned that are still in the grand plan, like that were planned from the beginning?
I mean, there are certainly elements of what we want Dorico to become that you can't really see fully yet in the software. But I think that probably condensing is like one of the biggest things that we were dreaming of when we started. And obviously it's fantastic to get to that point, but it's certainly not the end state. Yeah, I mean, I think that probably there's nothing that is completely invisible in terms of how the program now looks and feels that is sort of there to be sprung as a as a big surprise in a future version. But obviously, all of the sort of directions that you can see Dorico moving in now, in terms of engraving, in terms of input and editing, in terms of all the edits you can make in play mode and so on, those are the directions that we still have plenty of more distance to travel.
Now it's 2019, going to be 2020, and obviously you've been in this industry for many, many years. You've seen technology take a giant leap. What kind of modern technology is really going into Dorico? Is there like machine learning and like when you're doing condensing? There must be a lot of thinking under the hood that's happening for what appears to be a simple feature, but actually a lot of processing is happening underneath.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we don't use AI in the sense of like machine learning and training models and so on. Although, there is some interesting stuff going on in that area. In fact, we're now working with Queen Mary University here in London on a on a PhD project that is using machine learning to try to investigate what can be done with optical music recognition, for example, which is definitely something that we'd like to work on in the future. But the technology we have in Dorico so far, whether it's in condensing or in the other things, it's not so much artificial intelligence in as much as it's not using, as I say, neural networks and machine learning and models and so on. But it does kind of represent a certain kind of intelligence, because it is all about decision making, and it's about the program recognizing different musical situations, and then making decisions based on that. And certainly with condensing, one of the big challenges with it is that you have to be able to come up with a coherent set of effectively rules that will allow the user to have an expectation as to what the program's going to do when you give it music of different sort of characters and combinations of notes here and rests there and this pitch higher than that pitch and so on. So there's all of those kind of things that have to go into it. But rather than doing it in terms of, I suppose an approach would have been to kind of find lots and lots of scores that have condensed staves, and then provided you can kind of teach the model what it is it's looking at, you could then maybe sort of come up with a way of training a model to do that. But we took the rather more old school approach of kind of just really thinking about it very hard and try to come up with a bunch of rules that would work. And I think we've done that.
How many people are in the Dorico programming team? I mean, is it just one guy who's just, you're throwing these ideas at him and you lock him in a room and he comes out every couple of months with a new feature? How big is the Dorico team?
There are 8 programmers on the team. So it's not a huge team, but it's a very high performing team, I would say. In total, if you sort of just look at the people who are working in London, who are sort of in the so-called Dorico office, which is Steinberg's London office, there's 15 of us in London. Obviously, we couldn't do it without all of the support that we have from our colleagues in Hamburg. They provide obviously all of the business support and everything, but also huge technology support in terms of the Cubase audio engine and the Halion plugins and the sounds and all these other wonderful things that we benefit from. But in terms of that core, like all the features you see in Dorico that are not basically, in Halion or whatever, it's 8 people who are building that. And condensing obviously is very much a team effort, but the majority of the work on it was actually done by one developer. But we do it in a very kind of collaborative way. So we will bite it off a chunk at a time. We'll discuss as a team the design considerations. The programmers who are going to do the actual work will bat around some specific implementation ideas, because obviously there's different people who have different expertise across different areas of the program, although we try to share that out as much as we can so that there's not one bit of the program that only one person knows how it works.
There's a glowing review in Scoring Notes online, and but they did say that are you guys planning to tweak it, make it more refined with later updates?
Oh, yes, I mean, always. But I think it's fair to say that with condensing as it exists in Dorico 3.0 and 3.0.10, which we released last week, the things are they're in a pretty great state as they go. But the thing that is missing is the ability for the user to kind of tell Dorico, hey, actually, I think this would look better if we did X or Y in this particular situation. So the thing that we'll be adding, hopefully in an update, which will be free for Dorico 3 users before the end of the year, will be a thing called a condensation change, which is basically a way for you to say to Dorico, hey, you think you should do X or Y, but actually I think from here to here it's going to look better if we put these on the same staff or whatever. So yeah, we're always looking to increase the refinement, and there'll be some other improvements beyond to what Dorico does automatically as well. Like for example, one thing that people might have spotted is that if you have players who aren't actually playing, you still want to be able to condense them down onto the same staff with other players, but there's some restrictions with that at the moment. So yeah, I mean, we're always kind of, it's one of those things where you kind of have a deadline and you have to get the product out there, and you obviously work extremely hard to hit that date and to make sure that the program's in as good a state as it can be by that day. But there's always stuff that you wish you had time to do. So the fortunate thing is that we can go back around and do some more work on not only on condensing but also on some of the guitar features and so on that we added.
Right. Now let's actually move on. You said you've partnered with Sounderon to bring their choir library, Olympus Choir Micro, to Halion, and the Olympus Choir is included with Dorico 3. Now I know you're a singer. Did you have anything to do with this?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And again, I don't ever wish to cast aspersions on the hard work of my colleagues, but what we found, our users felt the same way I did, is that the vocal sounds that were included with Halion they just weren't good enough. Basically, they were very slow they had a very slow rise time, which meant that fast music, they didn't really sound well, and they weren't brilliantly tuned either. It was kind of like working with my choir in real life, but you need something a little bit. I hope they don't listen to this. You need something a little bit better tuned, really. And so I'd already been using Olympus Choir Elements, which is sort of the next level up in the Olympus Choir series, with Contact, and I thought it was fantastic. And so when I went to our instruments product manager, Florian, who kind of deals with Halion and third-party products and so on, and said, hey, we really need some better vocal sounds. And he said, okay, well, what do you have in mind? I said, well, if we get anything that sounds even half as good as Sound Iron Olympus Choir, then I'd be made up. And he said, oh, well, let's just ask them then.
Yeah. And that collaboration, they took to it pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been brilliant. Actually, they're again another small team, but they really have some wonderful instruments, and so they've been able to kind of reproduce the Olympus Choir Micro library in Halion, and we've, as you say, been able to include that with every copy of Dorico 3, and it's also included in the Absolute VST collection. If any of your
Playback is getting better and better, but now you've got Playback templates, which is newly released. You can save for future projects. Can you tell me what's the state of Playback in Dorico right now, and what's the future hold?
Yeah, so it's getting richer and richer. Playback templates are very handy because they allow you to take a third-party VST, whether it's VSL or East West Play or whatever it might be, and once you've kind of done that laborious setup of saying, well, in channel 1 it's a violin playing Pitts, and in channel 2 it's a violin playing Arco, all that kind of stuff, by telling Dorico, hey, this is a template, then you can very easily, when you open another project in the future, just kind of recall that setup and have it play that stuff back. So a lot of effort has gone into making it possible to really kind of save time when it comes to using these third-party libraries, but there's always more to do. So I mean, right now we're working on improving the playback of dynamics automatically, so that things like sforzandos and forte pianos will play back automatically and appropriately to the playback library that you're using. We also did a load of work on improving the UI in play mode, streamlining it, making it faster, making the mixer faster. We've also been working on things like pitch bend editing, and so there's going to be a lot more kind of MIDI editing functionality added to Dorico's play mode as it gets better, and going hand in hand with that, enriching what we do with VST expression maps so that you can trigger more of the capabilities of your sound library, and also making Dorico's sort of default interpretation of musical markings in the score richer. So, for example, it plays back trills very nicely right now, but it doesn't play back other ornaments. It can play back dynamics and it can play back tempo, but it can't play back pauses. So it's things like making those, just continuing to kind of, again, I mean, playback is a whole universe of its own inside Dorico because, I suppose with the possible exception of note input, it's the only feature that pretty much every user uses. So there's many different kind of directions it can go in, and so we need to serve both the composer who really knows how to get the best out of sample libraries, to give them the tools they're used to from Cubase and their other sequencers and digital audio workstations to be able to do that, but also for idiots like me who don't know how to do all that stuff. I want to be able to hit space and hear something that sounds good without me needing to know all that stuff. So sort of two masters to serve, but we have to kind of push towards both of those.
And how has the reception been with NotePerformer? I got a lot of excitement when it was announced that NotePerformer came to Dorico, and how is that progressing? It was beta, I think, the last time I checked. How is that going?
Yeah. It's still technically, I think Arne at Wallander Instruments still considers it to be a beta version at the moment. There's still, we work very closely with Arne. He's a tremendous guy. Again, you say Dorico is made by 8 people, but NotePerformer is made by 1 person, and what a clever person he is. It's obviously been a real benefit to Dorico users to be able to use NotePerformer because it does just sound fabulous. When I gave the launch introduction of Dorico back in September, I played a bit of, to show Condensing, I played back a bit of Jupiter from the planets, and I played it back with NotePerformer, and it just sounds astonishing for something where you can literally just open it up and hit space to play it back. It really is tremendous. So Arne and we work closely together to try to constantly unlock, because NotePerformer can do a lot that Dorico can't yet drive it to do, as it were. So we're always sort of trying to figure out how we can work closely with Arna to make it possible to access more of the advanced features that NotePerformer has, and both we and Arna will be working on that as both of our programs develop.
Okay, so what if somebody was on Sibelius right now, what would you say to them to say, okay, we're at version 3 now. What is your pitch to convert people over from Sibelius?
Yeah, I mean, I think already with Dorico 2, there was almost nothing, unless you were working with guitar notation, that Dorico couldn't do at that point. And I think that now we're at Dorico 3, and we've filled out that whole area of guitar functionality. There's still a bit more to do, but basically it's all there. I really think there's almost no excuse to be still using Sibelius at this stage. We've certainly, I think that if you are working with large ensembles like orchestras, bands, and so on, then you really have to try condensing, because even if at the moment you are sort of a lot of people who are using music notation software kind of have conditioned themselves to not kind of want, in inverted commas, a condensed score. They kind of say, well, it's going to be so difficult to make one. And if I just make the staves really small, I can print this out and it'll be fine. And of course, both Finale and Sibelius are really good at, giving you a nice page of music that looks good. But it's the fact that you can do now a condensed score basically for free, effectively. There's really no additional time required to put it in. And so, the real benefit to that is that, just like, as I say, being able to make a change in a partner, change in the score, or put something in the score and it doesn't collide with something else, the fact that now you can have a condensed score at a single click, whatever misgivings you may have about, well, I've been using Sibelius for years and I really know how to use it, and can I possibly become as efficient with another piece of software? The story that we hear over and over again from Dorico users who, almost without exception, they're coming to Dorico from either Sibelius or Finale, or occasionally from another program. But the thing that we hear is that once they've got over that initial speed bump of not having the familiarity with the paradigms of the software and exactly how it works, they save so much time once they're over that hump, that they sort of feel like if they ever do come across a little thing where they need to go back to Sibelius to do something, like to finish a project they're doing with another collaborator or whatever, it's painful. And I think that that has been borne out hundreds, thousands of times now. So if you're sitting there using Sibelius, particularly if you're using an older version, and you're thinking about, say, a lot of people never moved off Sibelius 6 because they didn't like the ribbon that we introduced. But if you're still looking at Sibelius 6, for example, and you're on the Mac, and Sibelius 6 is a 32-bit app, so it's not going to run on Catalina anymore, then you've got to make a move. You've got to move up to something. You've either got to go to Sibelius 2019, or you can look at switching to a different program altogether. And I think if you're thinking about switching from Sibelius 6 or Sibelius 7 to something newer because you're upgrading your Mac, or even if you're just looking for a more efficient way of working, then really you owe it to yourself to give Dorico a try.
I think a real marketing coup you guys have is, in terms of getting mainstream, is you got Alan Silvestri to shoot a 2-part segment on the Dorico YouTube channel, and that's about as big as it gets, because as we know, Avengers Endgame is one of the biggest grossing movies of the year and one of the most mainstream composers. Are there more names people might know, famous composers, arrangers that are using Dorico?
There are, although we haven't necessarily got the permission to name them publicly.
Right.
Luckily with Alan, I mean, he is just the most wonderfully generous man. He is a wonderful, wonderful person, and I feel extremely lucky to have been able to do that interview with him that we have on our YouTube channel. And he genuinely does use both Cubase and Dorico every single day, and he loves them. And we're very lucky that he does love them, and that he's so willing to say nice things about them. There are certainly other composers and arrangers who are using Dorico for some high profile projects now, but as I say, we can't necessarily always.
That must be it must be very gratifying to know that the software is being used in the industry.
Oh, it is. I mean, it's really, obviously we're trying to make a software that has as broad an appeal as possible. We want it to be able to be used in the secondary school with kids as young as, 12, 13 years old, or even younger.
That's a good question. Is Dorico starting to see more adoption in conservatories and education in general?
It absolutely is, yes. And again, it's tricky because, you think about switching one Dorico user from Sibelius or Finale, just somebody who's working on their own or working in a small team, but then you consider doing it to an educational institution that's got dozens of seats and several staff, and there's training to be done and so on. But yes, as I say, particularly once Dorico 2 came out last year in 2018, we really started to see an acceleration in adoption in schools, and both here in the UK and also in Germany and also in the US, we're starting to see more and more schools at least adding Dorico if they're not switching. What tends to happen is that because, of course, a school is teaching multiple years of cohorts, as it were, and so they have to, if you're in your third year and you've been using Sibelius since you got there, you don't want to be not using Sibelius to finish your course. So what tends to happen is they're starting with Dorico in the earlier years for the freshmen or for the people in the first year of the institution, and then, kind of rolling it up as those people go up through schools. So it'll be a bit of a transition period for those institutions that are doing it, but we're seeing more and more of it, and that's also wonderful because it means that these are the institutions that are going to be producing the musicians of tomorrow, and obviously it's much better for us if they're using our stuff than if they're using somebody else's.
Now, I don't know if you guys are aware, but there is a big movement in musicology and historical performance known as partimento, and it deals a lot with figures, figured bass, intervals, and I know there are some workarounds using lyrics and fonts, but is figured bass in the pipeline soon? Is that something you guys will tackle?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think I've said in the past, maybe even to you, Nikhil, that, the way we kind of look at it is that we sort of imagine, if you imagine the sort of musical history as the x-axis of a graph, then we kind of have to hit ourselves squarely at that common practice period that kind of ends really, or that begins rather, with the end of the Baroque and sort of leads up to the early part of the 20th century. And what we're now trying to do, now that we've really kind of fleshed out those areas pretty well, is to push both more modern in terms of more graphical notations and things that avant-garde and contemporary composers are wanting for art music and even for film music and so on, and also then at the other end to extend back into the Baroque and the Renaissance. So, we've already got, for example, pretty beautiful trills, say, which are very much part of that Baroque and classical world, but we are definitely lacking, and I think what we can say is that when we do, I think, and again, I want to express my admiration for Figurato, which is the font that...
Right, that's what people are using, yeah.
Exactly, it's a wonderful thing because Florian Kretlow, the developer of that font, who's a Dorico user and wrote some of the review, for example, in scoring notes. He's a big advocate for the program. He's kind of done something quite ingenious to get that working in terms of using open type positioning features and so on to get the figures to stack up and so on. It's really very neat. But we will obviously try to make it as easy as possible to input, and then also to have a certain degree of musical intelligence to it as well. So it's definitely something we'll be looking at soon, because I think that that and also Roman numerals for harmonic analysis, particularly in education, they're pretty widely used tools, and it would obviously be very helpful for educators and indeed for students who are doing musicology and those sorts of things to have better tools for those kinds of activities.
Great. Now, this is a question for my benefit because I'm an owner of Dorico 3, but I'm kind of not technically very savvy, and it's a big program. I do enjoy it. I want to get better at it. So could you recommend, what do I do if I wanted to start at the beginning and I wanted to get better at using Dorico? What can you suggest for people to do? Are there videos I can look at? Are there tutorials?
Definitely, yes, absolutely. So there's a variety of things you can do. Actually, one thing that we're working on in the actual sort of official operation manual, as it were, that will hopefully see the light of day fairly soon, is a kind of project-based introduction to Dorico that you can work through at your own pace, which I think will be a big help. We don't quite have that yet, but it will be coming soon. But in terms of the resources that do exist today, well, obviously, my colleague Anthony does an incredible job with the tutorial videos on YouTube, and in particular, if you wanted to kind of really just get the basics down, I would suggest the right mode playlist is a really, really great place to start because it takes you through all of the basic note input and editing, including, dynamics, slurs, playing techniques, all the, lyrics, chord symbols, all the things that you need to kind of be able to put in your average project. And so each of those videos is about 5 or 6 minutes at the longest. I think there might be 8 or so minutes long. And so in the space of about 40 minutes, you've got a pretty comprehensive introduction to the basics, including all of the things you need to understand about popovers, about the carat, about navigating migrating around and understanding how the user interface is put together. So I think that's a great resource. There are also some third-party video courses. I think Groove 3 have one, which is an introduction to the program, which I think is sort of 3 hours of tuition. It's not completely up to date with the very latest version of Dorico.
That's my question. You have a YouTube channel and it has a lot of instructional videos, but are some of the videos out of date because now we're at version 3 versus, version 1 and 2?
We probably will go back and revisit. I mean, the short answer is they are a little bit out of date, yes, but actually because the concepts of Dorico have remained very constant since the first version, to get the basics down for no-tip and so on is basically the same in Dorico 3 as it was in Dorico 1. So those videos still do cover everything that you need to know. I think that where we may be missing some things is that, of course, lots of new tools have been added even to the basic note input stuff in terms of things like manipulating voices and some arranging tools for exploding and reducing and moving things around easily. And so at the moment, those tools, which are huge time savers, aren't necessarily covered in the same depth in that initial series of videos. So Anthony and I have talked about going back around and redoing that initial write mode series in particular to kind of flesh them out with some of the tools that were added in Dorico 2 and 3. But I think even without those, I think you're going to get a pretty great grounding in the sort of mechanics of the program from that series.
Great. Last question is, you're the product marketing manager. Artists and composers can be a temperamental lot, and you're dealing with a lot of questions all the time. What's a common question or a couple of common questions that you get all the time that that there's an easy solution for, but people seem to be unaware of?
Oh, gosh. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, I'll tell you what it is, really, is that Dorico is so kind of, we try very hard to make the defaults that it produces very musical and very useful for a wide range of music. But one of the things that we hear about is, I think, particularly from people who are working in more, commercial music, or, what you might call music for media, or maybe sort of jazz inflected or even full on jazz stuff, is, there are certain defaults that they want to see that the program doesn't have kind of out of the box because they're engraving options that you have to switch on and off. And so I think that when we get a question that we commonly get, like, for example, I want to start repeat bar line at the beginning of the second system. How do I get a double bar line at the end of the previous system? When I try to put a double bar line there, it gets rid of the start, something like that. I think that what that tells us actually is that we're kind of on the right track, and people kind of are understanding enough about the basic concepts of the program, but there are still little things here and there where the way that the program thinks doesn't match the way that a certain class of user thinks for a certain kind of music. And so one of the challenges that I think we have is maybe like, for Dorico to ask you when you start up, what kind of music are you going to be writing? Is it going to be, music for media? Is it going to be jazz? Is it going to be, guitar stuff? Is it going to be choral? What is it going to be? And then we might be able to kind of tailor the way the program presents itself, or some of the defaults, for example, in such a way that we won't be getting some of those questions that we get. Because I think, if you're a piano kind of a user, you've got one set of concerns. If you're a jazz guy, you've got another set of concerns, and so on. And so I think that I'm always kind of thinking when I do get those questions repeatedly, we probably need to change something about the program in such a way as to make it clearer to this particular kind of user that they can do this another way. So I can't think necessarily of anything else off the top of my head. The bar line thing for some reason sticks in my mind. I think I do answer that question a lot, but I think that's kind of where it leads us, is to think about, okay, well, there's a certain type of user for whom that default isn't working. So how do we lead them to it, or how do we get them able to sort of tailor the program to their own needs a bit better?
I have a mini question, which is the final one, which is, when's the next update? Do you actually reveal that? And what's the pipeline like for 2020?
So the next update should be out before the end of the year. It's always a little bit difficult to predict because, of course, on one level, when it's not a major release where we're kind of doing a huge launch and there's kind of a big deadline and the whole company is kind of sort of lined up behind something, then obviously we're like the 3.0 date. We fix that months in advance, and we have to know when that is because everybody else has to do stuff. But when it's more of a sort of a sweep up kind of release like the next one is, then it's more along the lines of it's up to to us when we release it based on when we think it's ready and when we want to get working on the next one. So the current plan is there'll be another update to version 3 before the end of the year, which will add things like condensation changes and some more stuff in guitar and dynamics playback and some other nice things like that. And then after that for 2020, well, we will do another major version of some description in 2020. We sort of are trying to be on a kind of annual release cycle, which is kind of how Steinberg tends to try to operate. We have flexibility, though, and it's all down to really what we decide to do and how long we think that's going to take us, and balancing that against, what we think we need in terms of, for example, appealing to the educational market by releasing at a certain time, whatever it might be. So the plan is one more big feature-focused update for version 3 in 2019, and then sometime in 2020, another big-ish release with lots more exciting new stuff in it.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming on to talk about Dorico 3. Congratulations to you and your team for this great update, and I can't wait to practice with the software, and I hope to talk to you again when the next update drops. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nikhil. Thanks for having me.